On today's episode of Let's Talk Drones, we're unleashing American drone dominance. All right, I know that was a little over the top, but we are talking about the executive order that was recently signed by President Donald Trump revolving around American drone manufacturers and the American drone industry as a whole. I know I just recently made a video speculating on what could be in this executive order. Well, we don't really need to speculate too much any longer because this executive order has become public. Let's talk about it. Let's talk drones. What's up? It's Chris, the Drone Geek, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Drones. That's right, President Donald Trump has signed his executive order titled Unleashing American Drone Dominance. Now, what this order was speculated to be about was potentially the clash that we've seen over and over again for the past few years between the American side of the drone industry, or the Western side of the drone industry, and the Chinese or Eastern side of the industry. It's a tale as old as time. Of course, if you're from China, you're automatically an enemy of the United States. And if you're from America, you're from the United States, you're automatically an enemy of China. And there can never, ever be any cohesion ever, right? Well, whether or not you agree with that sentiment, the fact is we were all sort of waiting with bated breath to see what this executive order was going to be about. In a worst case scenario, some of us were expecting this executive order to be an all-out ban on DJI drones for anybody in the United States. That includes federal agencies, state agencies, and private citizens, as well as private companies, and using any type of drone technology manufactured out of China. In a best case scenario, we were waiting for President Trump to potentially dispel any idea of banning any type of industry or commerce or importing from the United States. Of course, that last little tidbit there might have been a stretch for that particular group to believe in, considering Donald Trump has made it very clear through the issuing of multiple tariffs against multiple countries that we import goods from here to the United States that we want to be American made for the most part. But for the majority of us, we knew that the truth was going to be somewhere in the middle, and myself, as well as many others in the community, also believed that this executive order was going to expedite the review, the audit that needed to be done as per NDA 24 on DJI and Autel as far as their products and their cybersecurity and just data security goes. We really were thinking that was going to be a part of this, as well as just bolstering American manufacturing when it comes to the drone industry. The truth is that it really didn't cover nearly as much of the foreign entity and Chinese drone stuff as I thought it was going to. In fact, it almost didn't state anything about it at all, and I can tell you with certainty, it didn't mention the word China anywhere in it, from what I could tell just reading it the first few times. It may have been implied when using the term foreign adversaries, but it never named DJI, it never named Autel, and it never named China anywhere in the executive order, which kind of blew me away. Overall, I'm actually pleasantly surprised to share with you that I think this executive order is a net positive for the industry. You don't believe me? Let's talk about some of the positives I see, and then we'll also cover a couple of the potential negatives on this executive order that we need to be aware of moving forward. First of all, let's touch on those positives, and the first few bullets here are going to revolve around beyond visual line of sight operation, which is really exciting for commercial operations utilizing drones, as well as public safety outfits. For instance, according to the executive order, there will be an issuing of a proposed rule for enabling beyond visual line of sight operations for UAS commercial and public safety purposes within 30 days of the executive order, and a final rule to be published within 8 months or 240 days of the executive order. There will also be an establishing of metrics for assessing the performance and safety of beyond visual line of sight operations within 30 days, and identifying and describing regulatory barriers and challenges to beyond visual line of sight implementation within 180 days. Now, before you get too excited about beyond visual line of sight, I'm here to tell you that what I've heard and what I've learned about Part 108, the upcoming Part 108, is that this isn't necessarily going to be a test that you can go and take and a different type of license you can earn. In fact, it sounds more like Part 108 is going to be issued to organizations, companies, outfits that are collectively as a group moving forward and saying, hey, we want a little bit more expansion in terms of how we can operate our drones for the purposes of our operations, our infrastructures, and our workflows. So while I'm not 100% certain on this, it does seem that the Part 108 enabling beyond visual line of sight, in conjunction with this executive order and the mandates that it's spitting out, it won't be something like what you took with the Part 107, where you actually went, took a test, earned a license, and then you just have to renew your license every 2 years with that recurring knowledge test or assessment. It's going to be something that's designed for companies. Think about Amazon, Walmart, companies, organizations, public safety groups that need sort of a blanket authorization for anyone operating a UAS under their umbrella. So if you work for Amazon, you work for Walmart, you are a police officer, a search and rescue member, or a firefighter that flies drones for the purpose of work, you may at some point be under a Part 108 blanket or umbrella where you'll be enabled to fly beyond visual line of sight and anything else that Part 108 entitles you to. Again, that could all be debunked, but that's my understanding as I listen to different folks that are closer to that subject talk about it and share information with me about it. That just seems like what we're going to get here, and it seems like the executive order is starting to put that into motion when it comes to beyond visual line of sight and mandating that this happens and that we talk more about this and that there's more data collected, released, rules made, etc., revolving around beyond visual line of sight operation of UAS or drones. Next, there will be a deployment of artificial intelligence tools to assist and expedite in the review of UAS waiver applications for Part 107 pilots. Thank God. At least as long as what is being said on paper here is what we're getting at face value. One of my biggest criticisms of the FAA is that they don't have the manpower or the resources in place to logistically, feasibly process all of the waivers that the UAS community has submitted to them for operating their drones in special circumstances and with exceptions. One problem that could still persist even with the implementation of AI to speed up and expedite the processing of those waivers is the lack of explanation when we don't get it quite right or we aren't up to the FAA standards when applying for a waiver exception. The fact is, I've submitted many of my own waiver applications for flying my drone in special circumstances and with exceptions. I've had a few granted to me, and in other cases, and most cases actually, I've been denied, I've been rejected. And the problem with that is that I've never been told why. Now, if you follow up with your local or your regional FSDO, you can get some of that cleared up. They're usually able to help you out when it comes to, coming up with a plan, filing your application, and putting it in a position to be as successful as possible or have the opportunity for success at the highest level possible. But the fact is if you reject my application, I would expect or hope that you just give me immediate feedback as to why it was rejected so that I can either go back to the drawing board and reconfigure my plan and then reapply for the waiver, or I can sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that's not happening and move on with my life. Hopefully, the AI tool will have the ability to do that as well, but if not, at least our applications will get rejected a little bit faster so we don't have to wait 30, 60, 90 days sometimes for them to be processed and either approved or denied. The executive order also states that there will be a prioritization for the integration of UAS manufactured in the United States by all federal agencies over those made abroad to the maximum extent permitted by law. We've already seen this happen at the federal level, and we're starting to see it at the state government level as well, with states like Florida, Texas, and others, where agencies that are funded by these federal and state governments are being required to utilize their funding to purchase drones that are compliant with NDAA, with Blue List, and are American-made and/or are American-made drones. So we've already started to see this rule out. It looks like this executive order is just doubling down on that in terms of all agencies that receive any type of federal funding and will continue to pursue American manufactured drones. And that is an important distinction to make. You may not think it is, but words matter when it comes to stuff like this. There's a difference between non-Chinese and NDAA compliant versus American made. Two completely different things. You could have an NDAA compliant drone manufactured in France. We saw it with Parrot. But that doesn't mean that it's American made. So for these areas in this executive order and in any laws or mandates or anything that's written by the government relating to UAS, if it doesn't specifically say NDAA compliant somewhere in the statement that's being made, and it does say American made drones, that means companies like Parrot that would technically, if all parts are manufactured in France would technically be NDAA compliant. It means that they don't get access to the same prioritization that American companies are going to have. So keep that in mind as well. It's a distinction that may seem subtle, but it's very important to make note of. And finally, American manufacturers will be prioritized related to funding and financing to the maximum extent permitted by law via the following means. First of all, direct loans and loan guarantees. Second, equity investments and co-financing. Third, political risk insurance and credit guarantees. Fourth, technical assistance, feasibility studies, and grant mechanisms. Fifth, market access facilitation. And sixth, and finally, any other incentive mechanisms authorized by law. This is the real win when it comes to the executive order. I know that I've made it very clear I love DJI and I don't want them to be banned in the United States. I don't want any Chinese drone technology to be banned because it really would take the legs out from underneath me and what I do day to day with my drones, flying my DJIs for photo and video purposes, building, flying, racing, and just having a good time with my FPV drones, and so many other facets of what I do with drones at both a personal and hobby level as well as a professional level. It really would impact me quite negatively that way, but that doesn't mean that I'm anti-American drone. In fact, that's the furthest thing from the truth. I'm just living in a reality right now where the technology that I can afford to do my job at the highest level possible, it happens to come from China. It happens to come from DJI. But the fact is, DJI was subsidized by the Chinese government when they first started to scale their manufacturing. They were incentivized to fill shipping containers because the Chinese government said, hey, if you can fill the shipping containers, we'll pay for them just to make sure that you can continue to distribute out on an international basis. So DJI was then incentivized to invest its own money into its manufacturing capabilities, scale its manufacturing up, and ensure that it could fill as many shipping containers as possible. So without that incentivization from the Chinese government, it's hard to tell where we'd be at with DJI in the industry. I'm sure that they'd still be relevant, but would they be as relevant and dominant as they are now? We need the same thing for American companies. And quite frankly, every country should be doing this with their domestic manufacturers of UAS right now, because the entire western side of the industry is behind by 7 to 10 years. That's just a reality of it. So without this type of incentivization financially, via loans, via subsidizations, grants, whatever the case may be, we just won't catch up. And the fact that this executive order outlines that there will be a prioritization for American drone companies to receive the financing and the money and the incentivization and the grants that they need to do the things that they need to do when it comes to scaling the technology and scaling the manufacturing of said technology, that is a huge win for the American side of the industry. And I quite frankly have to applaud whoever helped put this executive order together. I know that Donald Trump signs it, but obviously there's a team of people that help him put it together and actually contribute information and perspective to it. So I have to applaud that team, because that is exactly what we've needed for a very long time. I am excited to see and anxious to see, quite frankly, how it impacts everything. But if there's one big takeaway from this that affects everybody when it comes to options in the market, this is it. And hopefully there's no strings attached to it, and this is just a straightforward interpretation as to what we're going to expect when it comes to American manufacturers. Now, with all of that fanfare that I just shared with you, that doesn't mean that there aren't parts of this executive order that I'm still concerned about. I'm not calling these negatives yet. I'm calling them potential negatives from the executive order unleashing American drone dominance. First of all, the order states that there will be a publishing of a covered foreign entity list as defined in NDAA 2024 to identify companies that pose supply chain risks to the United States within 30 days. There will also be a proposal for rulemaking and conducting investigations to secure the United States drone supply against foreign control or exploitation within 90 days. Now, the reason I call these potential negatives is because at face value, they aren't true negatives. There's no firm stance taken on what's going to happen. It's just going to be expanding upon an idea that's already sort of been festering with that covered entity list and identifying risks to American national security. Now, this is the part where I sort of outlined a little bit earlier that presumption, that assumption that using the word adversaries or covered entities, that really points at China, and expect this to evolve into that, but it doesn't explicitly state it. This also sort of leads me to believe that there will be an expedition made on the audit and the investigation or the review of DJI and Autel technology when it comes to the risks that they pose from a cybersecurity and data security perspective. So, all things said, I'm concerned about these, and I don't really know how to further elaborate on what we should expect moving forward, so I'm not going to. But I would say, if you are concerned about the livelihood of DJI in the American market and your access to that technology, pay attention to these 2 points in particular and how they start to unfurl as this executive order moves its way out into the UAS industry and some of these things start to become actionable. Long story short, guys, the executive order kind of was underwhelming. There are some exciting parts of it. There are some parts that I'm a little bit hesitant to accept or appreciate because of the potential risks they pose to me, my operation, and many other people like me in the United States. But I will say it's kind of underwhelming because it's not a lot of new stuff. It's just stuff that has been sitting out there in the ether that is now sort of had a statement made about it from this administration. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up icon down below. It helps me out a lot, helps get this video out into the algorithm to more viewers like yourself. If you really love this video, you love drone content shot by drones, about drones, and for drone pilots, my friend, this is the channel for you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and while you're at it, hit the bell icon too. It helps me out a lot and gives you a notification every time I post a new video. Until next time, I'm Chris the Drone Geek, and I'm out of here. See ya.
Yo, what you say? Steady screaming, YOLO, rockin' polo, we the fight.